Admiral Zoreth stood motionless in the shadows of the command center, his alien eyes scanning the scene unfolding before him. The vast expanse of the warship's bridge stretched out around him, a place of power and control. Yet now he felt oddly disconnected. He had seen countless simulations, countless humans struggling to grasp the basics of Starship operation. But today was different. Today, he watched a human child no older than 10 step into the room with an air of confidence that was impossible to ignore. The child's small hands gripped the controls of the ancient Starship simulator with an ease that struck Zoreth. Immediately, the room was silent as the crew gathered around the viewing windows, all eyes fixed on the child, who had become the center of attention. Yet none dared speak. Zoreth found the moment unsettling, as though the gravity of the situation had yet to hit them. The child seemed unaware of the gazes on them. The small face was calm with an almost playful expression, not a hint of fear or nervousness. It was a look that he had seen many times before in seasoned soldiers, those who had fought in countless battles, those who had seen the horrors of war. Yet here, it was on the face of a child whose only experience in the galaxy had been the stories told by the humans themselves. Zoreth couldn't help but wonder what this child's game would be like. Was it truly a game, or was something deeper happening, something his species could never have anticipated? The child sat at the controls of the simulator with a deep concentration. Zoreth's mind was racing as he observed the movement's tiny adjustments that were anything but amateurish. The human race was often viewed by his people as primitive, unworthy of being considered a serious threat. Their technology crude compared to the advancements of the alien species that ruled the galaxy. Their ships were slow and fragile, their weapons ineffective, yet somehow humanity had survived, had managed to carve out a place in the galaxy, and now here in front of him was a living example of what Zoreth had been taught to dismiss as mere childish play. The simulator hummed to life, the screens around the child flickering as the vast landscape of space took shape before them. Zoreth's attention sharpened as the child began to move the starship effortlessly through an asteroid field. Without hesitation, the movements were smooth, calculated, each decision made with an instinctive grace that Zoreth could not comprehend. The child's hands moved faster than the eyes could follow, twisting and turning the ship through a maze of floating debris with an almost unnatural precision. Zoreth's crew watched in silence. None of them dared speak, their voices caught in their throats as they witnessed the impossible. The child was not struggling to understand the controls, as one would expect. No, the child was guiding the ship as if they had done so 1,000 times before. Zoreth felt a strange unease in his chest. Something was off. He had been taught to expect the unexpected when dealing with humans, but this was beyond his expectations. He had seen simulations before. He had watched humans fumble through basic tasks. But this was something different. The child was no longer simply playing a game. The child was thinking and acting with purpose. Zoreth's mind raced as he considered what he was witnessing. Was it possible? Could a human child possess the skills of a seasoned commander? Could they already be training for a future Zoreth had yet to understand? The hum of the simulator filled the room as the virtual universe materialized around the child's ship, a vast expanse of stars, planets, and distant nebulae. Stretching out in all directions, the child's fingers moved with purpose. No wasted motions, no hesitation. Every input felt deliberate, as though they were already familiar with the intricacies of space travel. The Admiral watched in a quiet disbelief as the ship weaved gracefully through the swirling asteroid field. And yet, despite the inherent danger, the child's focus never wavered. The Admiral's thoughts were sharp, his mind always quick to analyze every situation. But this was unlike anything he had encountered before. He had observed human soldiers in battle. He had studied their war tactics, their unpredictability, their wild abandon in the heat of conflict. But this was different. The child wasn't chaotic or impulsive. They weren't trying to adapt. They had already adapted in ways Zoreth had never thought possible. The movements were fluid, each maneuver instinctive, yet calculated. He felt a sense of discomfort creep into his mind as he saw how effortlessly the ship passed through gaps between rocks, dodging objects that would have shredded the hull of any of his own ships. Zoreth couldn't help but feel a sense of growing awe mixed with unease. There was something fundamentally unsettling about the child's ability to grasp the ship's complex systems with such ease, and with such a natural flow. It was as though they were born to do this, born to command a starship that was meant for seasoned warriors, and not for children. The room around the Admiral was silent. No one dared speak, but the crew was visibly tense, their eyes wide with surprise and confusion. No one had anticipated this, not even Zorath. The simulations were designed to be challenging even for the most advanced pilots from across the galaxy, yet this child had already mastered the first stage. Without breaking a sweat, the ship now entered a new phase of the simulation. The virtual space opened up into an empty expanse. Before an approaching enemy fleet, the Admiral leaned forward, his sharp gaze now locked on the screen as he observed the child's next move. The child didn't flinch, didn't even show the faintest hint of fear. Instead, they tilted the ship's nose upward, scanning the incoming threat with a calmness Zorath found almost unnerving. Without a second thought, the child reached for a new set of controls and initiated evasive maneuvers that would have seemed reckless in the hands of anyone else. But there was no hesitation, no panic in the child's actions. Zorath's mind was reeling. What he had seen so far could not be the product of mere training or instinct. This was something different. The child's choices were deliberate, calculated, as though they understood more than just the basics of warfare. The way they read the situation told Zorath one thing, and one thing only: this was no game. This was a practice run for something much larger. The Admiral's heart skipped a beat as he watched the child make a decision that shocked everyone in the room. The child locked onto a target with laser focus and executed a counter-maneuver that left the enemy fleet in disarray. As the simulation progressed, Zorath's earlier discomfort began to morph into something far more profound. This child wasn't playing, they were strategizing. Like a commander in the middle of a real battle, the Admiral couldn't understand how someone so young could show such depth of thought and clarity, but the evidence was undeniable. The child was no longer just participating in a game. They were already seeing the battlefield with the eyes of a leader. The simulation's display flickered as the child's ship adjusted its course with precision, navigating through enemy fire and explosive debris with a grace that would have impressed the most seasoned pilots in the galaxy. Zorath leaned forward, his sharp eyes tracking every movement on the screen. The ship moved as though the child could see every possibility before it even unfolded. The Admiral's mind raced through countless scenarios, trying to predict what would happen next. But every time he thought he had caught up, the child's ship would defy logic or reason and find a new path through the chaos. The enemy fleet was vast and heavily armed, its weapons capable of destroying the human ship with a single strike. Yet the child was already 3 steps ahead, as if they had known exactly what the enemy would do before they even fired their first shot. The first wave of enemy ships moved in with typical military discipline, their laser cannons blazing with calculated aggression and efficiency. Yet the child's ship responded with a series of unexpected maneuvers, a sharp turn followed by a sudden burst of speed. The child had exploited a blind spot in the enemy's formation, a space too small for even a standard human ship to fit through, and yet the child's craft squeezed through it. Without a second thought, the Admiral could feel his pulse quickening with each calculated move the child made. Their control was flawless, their every action was intentional, as though the child had already faced this exact scenario 1,000 times before. The Admiral's crew watched in stunned silence, their usual murmurs of awe and admiration replaced with a deep sense of disbelief. None of them could comprehend what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a fluke. This wasn't just luck. This child was playing at a level that defied every expectation. The next wave of enemies appeared as the child's ship flew deeper into the heart of the enemy fleet. Zorath saw the simulation adjust, the opposition growing fiercer and more intelligent. But the child seemed unfazed. The enemies responded with more coordinated attacks, trying to trap the human ship in a pincer movement. But the child anticipated their every move once again. It was as if they had already seen the battle unfold in their mind. Before the first shot was fired, the child juked left, then right, evading the attackers with ease. The speed at which the child processed information was unnerving. The Admiral's species had always prided itself on its advanced intellect, its capacity for calculated thinking. But here before him was something that seemed almost intuitive. The child wasn't thinking in the same way that Zoreth's species did. There was a natural understanding of the situation, a fluidity that his people had long since lost in their rigid approach to warfare. Zoreth began to wonder if this was an innate gift of the human race, something he hadn't noticed before, something he had dismissed as irrelevant in the past. The child's hands danced across the controls, effortlessly steering the ship into the heart of the enemy formation. The maneuver was risky, but it worked. The enemy ships were left disoriented and fragmented, unable to respond as the child's ship swiftly picked off one target after another. Zoreth found himself holding his breath as the child's strategy unfolded before him. Every action taken was a perfect counterbalance to the threats presented. Every step forward felt like an inevitability, as if the child had known the entire outcome from the very beginning. The Admiral's confidence in his own tactical brilliance began to waver. How could a child possess this level of foresight? How could they understand the art of war so deeply, so instinctively? Was it a product of mere luck, or had humanity developed something far? As the battle simulation raged on, the Admiral's mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. With every move the child made, Zoreth's disbelief grew deeper. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty in the child's actions. They moved with the certainty of a general who had seen decades of war. The child's hands guided the ship through a cascade of explosions and enemy fire without a hint of fear or doubt. Zoreth's initial shock began to turn into something far more unsettling. It wasn't just the child's skills that baffled him, but the way they seemed to approach the battle itself. It was as if they weren't simply reacting to the simulation, but predicting it. The child's every move felt deliberate, each maneuver not just a counter to the immediate threat, but a step toward an inevitable victory. The child seemed to be thinking multiple steps ahead in a way that defied conventional understanding. The enemy ships were more numerous and more advanced than anything the child had faced so far, yet the child's ship danced through their fire as though it were a simple game. The Admiral's chest tightened as he realized something was happening that he couldn't explain. The child was not just playing a game. They were commanding the battle like a seasoned commander. But more than that, it felt like the child was seeing the entire conflict in a way Zoreth himself could not. His species had long prided itself on its intelligence, on its ability to calculate every possible outcome of a situation. But here was a human child not just reacting to the battlefield, but anticipating it. The child's actions were so instinctive, so natural, that Zoreth wondered if they had already seen the outcome before the first shot was fired. The child's starship darted in and out of enemy fire with an ease that would have been impossible for any of his crew to replicate. The maneuvers were smooth and graceful, a dance of survival and precision. Zoreth's thoughts shifted as he watched the child take a risk, a daring move that most pilots would never have attempted. The child thrust the ship directly into the heart of the enemy fleet, where there was no escape, no easy way out. But the child didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. With a single flick of their fingers, they altered the ship's trajectory, shifting it just slightly to avoid a deadly barrage of laser fire. The child's instincts were sharp, far sharper than anything Zoreth had expected. They seemed to understand the flow of battle, as though it were a living thing. Each shift in the enemy's movements anticipated long before the attack even began. Zoreth had trained his mind to process every possible angle of conflict. He had here before him was a human child whose mind worked in ways that were completely alien to him. The Admiral's heart raced as he realized that the child wasn't just playing to win the simulation. They were already thinking like a commander, thinking like a tactician. Every choice was a deliberate step toward outsmarting the enemy and achieving victory. The child had instinctively grasped something Zoreth's species had lost long ago, the art of thinking beyond the immediate moment and seeing the entire battlefield in its entirety. It wasn't just about survival or evading attacks. It was about commanding the situation, manipulating it to one's advantage. And Zoreth felt an undeniable surge of recognition as the child executed a flawless maneuver. He had seen it before, not in simulations, not in games, but in the battlefields of his people's history. The child wasn't just playing at war. They were already understanding it in a way no one could have predicted. The child's ship surged forward, cutting through the heart of the enemy fleet with the grace of a predator on the hunt. Zorath's gaze remained fixed on the screen, the complexity of what he was witnessing slowly beginning to dawn on him. This was no ordinary simulation, no simple game. The child wasn't just playing. They were navigating a battlefield with an intuition that defied logic. It was as if they understood warfare in ways that Zorath's people, with all their centuries of experience, could never truly grasp. The enemy fleet had regrouped, its ships arrayed in a defensive formation that would have been impenetrable to any standard pilot. Zorath had seen it all before. His people had used the same tactics, executed them with perfect precision, and crushed countless foes. But here, in this moment, he watched as a human child, barely a decade old, began to dismantle it piece by piece. The child didn't hesitate, didn't overthink. They responded to the situation with an almost serene confidence. Every choice, every move felt like the child was playing a game of chess against opponents who hadn't even learned the rules. Zorath's crew, who had initially watched in quiet curiosity, now shifted in their seats. There was an unspoken tension in the air, a growing realization among them all. This wasn't just impressive, it was unsettling. How could a child possess this level of tactical brilliance? How could someone so young intuitively know the weaknesses of an enemy fleet without ever having fought in an actual battle? The child's ship dodged a volley of laser fire, using the debris of a shattered enemy ship as cover. It was a risky maneuver, one that would have resulted in disaster for anyone else. But the child was already thinking 2, 3 steps ahead. They anticipated the enemy's counterattack before it even began. With a precise flick of the controls, the child directed the ship into a roll, avoiding an incoming missile, and then, almost casually, launched a devastating strike at the enemy's lead ship. It exploded in a brilliant flash, sending a shockwave through the remaining forces. Zorath's mind whirled as he processed what he was witnessing. The child was making decisions that were, in his experience, far too advanced for their age. The ship moved not like an isolated vessel, but as part of a larger strategy, a symphony of tactics unfolding in real time. The child wasn't merely reacting to threats. They were anticipating them, calculating the enemy's next move with the precision of a master tactician. Zorath's eyes narrowed as the child's ship moved deeper into the enemy formation. It was a bold strategy, one that no seasoned commander would have risked in such a volatile situation. The child wasn't playing to survive. They were playing to win. Every movement was calculated, every choice a step toward crushing the opposition. And as the child executed a series of flawless evasive maneuvers, it became clear to Zorath that the human mind was capable of far more than he had ever given it credit for. This wasn't just a display of skill, it was the manifestation of a new form of warfare, one based not on sheer force, but on adaptability, unpredictability, and a deep understanding of the battlefield. Zorath had spent centuries honing his tactical brilliance, but in that moment, he felt a shiver of realization. Humans were not only capable of creating this new form of warfare, they were already masters of it. As the child continued to dismantle the enemy fleet with calculated precision, Zorath couldn't help but wonder, was this the future of warfare? A future where human ingenuity and adaptability surpassed even the most advanced strategies of the galaxy's most dominant civilizations. The child's hands remained steady, almost absent-mindedly commanding the starship with the confidence of someone far older. Zorath couldn't tear his gaze away from the screen, the scene unfolding before him as perplexing as it was unsettling. The enemy fleet, once a terrifying force, was now crumbling under the child's tactical mastery. The starship danced through a minefield of debris and wreckage, its movements so precise they seemed to defy the very laws of physics. The simulations were always supposed to push the human mind to its limits, testing the reflexes, the ability to adapt, the endurance of the pilots. But what Zorath was witnessing now went beyond simple adaptability. The child's mind worked differently. Zorath could feel it. It wasn't just a sharpness of thought, or an inherent talent. There was a clarity in the way the child analyzed the battlefield, as if they weren't simply reacting to events but controlling them. They saw not only the ship in front of them, but the entire grid of possibilities stretching out in all directions. The more Zorath watched, the more it dawned on him. This wasn't just natural skill. It was something inherent, something woven into the very fabric of humanity. Zorath's breath caught in his throat. Could this be it? Could this be what his species had overlooked for so long? He had always thought of humans as a raw and untapped species, fierce and resilient, yes, but not strategic. He had assumed their strength lay in their survival instinct, their ability to outlast. But what he saw now was something deeper, something more intricate. This child's actions weren't just instinct. They were intelligence in its purest form, shaping the battle as if the child had been born for this purpose. The Admiral's mind raced, his thoughts spinning as he connected dots he hadn't even realized were there. The child's ship now moved into the final phase of the simulation, surrounded on all sides by the enemy fleet. For a moment, the child appeared to pause, their fingers lingering over the controls as if considering the next move. Zorath's heart thudded in his chest. The child's ship was cornered, the odds stacked against them. But even in this moment of apparent vulnerability, the child wasn't backing down. Instead, they were calculating, looking for the opening, the 1 in 1,000 chance that would turn the tide. The child's ship surged forward, cutting through enemy lines with a sudden burst of speed. Zorath blinked, taken aback. The maneuver was brilliant, a calculated risk that none of his fleet's seasoned pilots would have dared attempt. The ship dove toward the center of the enemy formation, evading fire at the last possible moment. The enemies were caught off guard, their fire ineffective, as the child's ship twisted and turned through their ranks with uncanny agility. Zorath could barely keep up with the sequence of movements. The child wasn't just playing to survive. They were playing to outthink, to outmaneuver, to break the enemy's strategy before they even had a chance to respond. It was as if the child understood the battle in a way that Zorath himself never could, like a step-by-step puzzle, where each piece fit perfectly into the next. A cold shiver ran down the Admiral's spine. He realized, with terrifying clarity, what he had been missing all along. Humans weren't just surviving. They were adapting to warfare in a way that made them unpredictable, nearly impossible to counter. Zorath had spent his life perfecting the art of strategy, teaching his people how to dominate, how to control the battlefield. But this child wasn't following the rules. They were rewriting them. And in that moment, Zorath understood the truth. Humanity was not a threat that could be measured by force or technology. It was something far more dangerous, an unpredictable, adaptive force that could not be controlled. The simulation had reached its final stage. The child's starship was surrounded by a sea of enemy vessels, their weapons primed and ready to obliterate the small ship at any moment. Zorath could feel the tension building in the command center, the crew's collective breath held in anticipation. The child, seemingly unaware of the mounting pressure, remained focused, their fingers hovering over the controls with the same calm precision that had defined their every move up to this point. Zorath found himself caught in an unusual silence, the same silence that had consumed him since the moment the child had first begun to pilot the ship. The air in the room felt thick, charged with a sense of something far more significant than just a training exercise. It was as though, in the span of a few minutes, the child had become something more, a force to be reckoned with, not just a participant in the game, but a contender in the grand arena of galactic warfare. The enemy fleet moved in, their weapons launching a barrage of fire toward the child's ship. Zorath's sharp eyes studied the tactics. This was a classic pincer movement, designed to trap and overwhelm any ship that dared enter the kill zone. The maneuver was flawless, efficient. It was the kind of attack that had wiped out countless enemies across the galaxy, a strategy his species had perfected over centuries. Yet in the face of it, the child's ship didn't flinch. Zorath leaned in closer, watching as the child assessed the situation. For the first time, The Admiral noticed the subtle shift in the child's movements, a flick of the wrist, a change in the angle of the ship's trajectory. It was as if they were considering every possibility, in an instant processing variables that no one else could even perceive. And then, in a split second, the child did something that took Zoreth by complete surprise. Without warning, the ship shot forward at an almost impossible speed, piercing through the center of the enemy fleet. The enemy ships, now in disarray, fired wildly, unable to predict the child's next move. The child's ship dodged, dipped, and rolled with an almost supernatural agility, each movement a calculated response to the chaos around them. The Admiral watched in awe, his chest tightening as he realized what was happening. The child wasn't just responding to the situation. They were controlling it. The ship's path was a symphony of action, each maneuver a counter to the next threat, each decision a deliberate step toward a flawless victory. Zoreth's mind raced. How was this possible? How could a human, someone with no experience in real combat, show such mastery over the battlefield? The sheer audacity of the move left the Admiral speechless. No one in Zoreth's fleet would have dared make such a bold play. It was too risky, too unpredictable. But the child's confidence, their certainty, was undeniable. The enemy ships, now disoriented and vulnerable, fell one by one to the child's strategic brilliance. The ship moved like a phantom, evading fire and striking at the perfect moment. Zoreth could barely keep up with the sequence of events unfolding before him. Every decision the child made was both unexpected and perfectly executed. The enemy fleet was falling apart, its lines broken, its cohesion shattered. As the final enemy ship was destroyed in a brilliant explosion, the child's ship hovered in the center of the simulation's virtual battlefield, victorious. Zoreth exhaled, his breath sharp, his thoughts spinning. For the first time in his life, he felt a deep, undeniable sense of awe and fear. The child had not just won. They had redefined what was possible. The simulation had been a test, yes, but it had also been something else, a glimpse into the future, a future where humanity would not simply survive. They would dominate. Zoreth's gaze shifted to the crew around him. The room was silent, the weight of the moment settling over them. No one spoke, not because they didn't know what to say, but because they all knew what they had witnessed. Something profound had just occurred. The room remained deathly silent. Zoreth couldn't move, his eyes locked on the screen where the child's victorious starship hovered in the midst of the destroyed enemy fleet. The simulation was over, but its implications were only just beginning to settle in. Around him, the crew stood motionless, as if afraid to speak, as if any words would shatter the gravity of what they had just witnessed. The child, this small, human child, had done the impossible. Zoreth stood frozen, his mind awash with confusion and realization. He had come here to watch a human fail. He had come to see how a child might fumble through a game they didn't understand, to confirm once and for all the superiority of his species. But instead, he had witnessed something that defied all logic. It wasn't just the child's exceptional skill. It was their ability to think in ways Zoreth's species had long since abandoned. The humans weren't just capable of surviving. They were capable of dominating, of reshaping the very nature of conflict itself. The Admiral's heart beat faster as the weight of the moment hit him. Was this just a fluke, a one-time event that could be chalked up to luck? No, he knew better. The child had operated with a calm, fluid understanding of the battlefield, seeing the ebb and flow of the fight before anyone else could. They had used tactics that were so alien to Zoreth's own approach, tactics that involved not brute force but adaptation, unpredictability, and a deep understanding of the chaos of war. The child had turned the tide in ways that Zoreth's species could never have predicted. Impossible, Zoreth muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. His voice was barely audible, a hushed whisper of disbelief. One of the crew members, still staring at the screen, turned to him. "Admiral, what just happened?" Zoreth glanced around the room at the faces of his crew, some filled with shock, others with dawning realization. They had all come here expecting to watch a simple training exercise, expecting to witness the usual human shortcomings. But what they had seen instead was something that would challenge everything they had ever believed about the human race. Zoreth took a slow breath and turned his attention back to the child, who was now calmly removing their hands from the controls as if they had just finished a routine task. The child's face was serene, almost detached, as though they had simply completed another day at school. But Zoreth knew better. What the child had done wasn't just playing. It was the beginning of a revolution. This was the future. The Admiral felt a profound shift in his understanding of warfare, of what it meant to be truly powerful. His people had relied on strength, on superior technology, on rigid strategies. But this child had shown him something far more dangerous: the ability to outthink, outmaneuver, and rewrite the rules of combat itself. The galaxy had always been divided by power, by might, by sheer force. But humanity, humans, would now challenge that balance, not with superior weapons or technology, but with something far more unpredictable: their minds. Zoreth stood there for a long moment, the implications of what he had just witnessed sinking in. He didn't know what the future would hold, but one thing was certain: humanity was no longer a race to be dismissed. They were a force, an unpredictable, adaptive force, that could no longer be ignored. And as the Admiral turned away, a single thought echoed in his mind: the game has changed.